Hello, this is the first video in quite a bit of time. It's going to be a pretty short one, maybe. I got asked by Jamie Vatarga, I think is the right way to pronounce that. Let's see. On Discord. No, Jamie Vatarga. Vatarga. Maybe I got it right the first time. Either way, Jamie asked me to do a video on dynamic bones, or rather they asked me to explain why dynamic bones is so heavy, or at least to show that it's heavy, because a lot of people have been asking, why is the performance ranking system so dang hard on dynamic bones? So I would be glad to tell you, however, it's hard to do in text. So let's do a short video to show you how. So I've got Unity up right here. I have my model up right here. There's no dynamic bones in my model. I don't normally use any. So for this test case, I'm actually gonna shove one onto the hips. We can look at the profiler from there. So let's go ahead and pull up the profiler, which is an important tool for you to kind of prove this to yourself. Pull this up with window, and profiler is on there. You can also use Control 7 to pull it up. There's a lot of stuff in here. The main things we're going to be looking at is CPU usage right here. So we are going to look at that in just a moment. But first off, we need to actually add the dynamic bones to the view, the actual model. I need to get this out of the way, but keep it on screen. You just kind of sit down there. Let's take my model right here and add a dynamic bone script. And we are just going to shove it right on the hips. So if you're familiar with dynamic bones at all, you're going to recognize pretty much immediately what's going to happen with this. When I turn on play mode, every single one of the bones are just going to animate. I'm going to leave all the settings on default, 60 update rate, which is the cap in VRChat and what most people leave it at. And we are going to run and come back into scene view and see how this affects our CPU usage. So I'm going to hit play, and it's going to go into play mode and start playing some sounds and stuff, whatever. What we're going to do, however, is I'm going to pull up the transformation handles for the main part of the rig and move it around a little bit. You can see that my frame rate is suffering quite a bit. My machine is not really, my machine's not awful. My machine's pretty good. I've got a i9 9900K. So CPU is definitely not like low tier, but it is already causing bad frame rate. So let's go ahead and pause real quick and take a look at a breakdown of some of these stats. So I'm going to adjust this by, actually time MS is fine. So this is the amount of time it spent on the CPU. You can see that there's a lot of editor overhead, so we can ignore all of that. And if you click on it, it will hide it. So the player update time, I believe, nope, that's waiting for the target FPS. So basically my target FPS is, I believe, 200 by default in the Unity editor. So we can ignore that. The profiler also we can ignore because this is just basically a cost because we're running the profiler. And then we can look, I believe, at pre-late update is where we want to look. Yep, pre-late update script, run behavior late update. We're going to look down into late update behavior. And this is where we find Dynamic Bones main process. So Dynamic Bones runs on an event called late update. It's basically a frame timing in, oh, that's a wonderful face. I just now looked up at it. It's a frame timing in Unity. You can choose a bunch of different locations to run scripts, such as on update, on deferred update, on late update, and it basically is just its position in the frame when it's being run. You can see here that it is taking 0.17 milliseconds to run just for this model for these dynamic bones. And I believe I have Pumpkin's tools installed, so if we do this, we can look, see how many dynamic bone transforms I have. I have 106. And the root is not animated, so the hips don't count, I guess. Yeah, the hips don't count because the root isn't animated. Either way, over 100 dynamic bones, and we are using 0.17 milliseconds of time. So this is important for a couple of reasons. When you're running in VR, your target is 90 FPS. So if you take 1,000 milliseconds and you divide it by 90, you get about like 11 or 12 milliseconds of time. So that means everything that VRChat needs to do to hit your 90 FPS, everything, whether that be networking, whether that be IK, whether that be rendering, or dynamic bones in this case, must occur within those 11 to 12 milliseconds. And everything has a cost. Some things don't cost much, like rendering a material on a single skin mesh render. It's pretty cheap, doesn't take long. Some things take a long time. For example, dynamic bones. 0.17 milliseconds is a long time in computer time, and especially when you only have 11 milliseconds to go. So basically, we have used up like 1, maybe 2% of our time in milliseconds available to us. Am I doing that math right? Sounds about right. Whatever, close enough. It's late, it's 3 in the morning. And 1 to 2% isn't all that much, but that's 100 dynamic bones. Which is why if you've got 30 people in the room and everyone is in a good rated avatar, I believe the good rating is, it's either 8 or 16, I remember. I think it's 8, for dynamic bone transforms. So, you got a room of 30 times 8, you're already over 100, wherever the hell that lands. Again, hard to do math this time of night. So, yeah, let's go ahead and expand this out a little bit. So I'm going to unpause real quick, and I wonder if I can do this in edit mode without having or in play mode. Let's just hit Control D and duplicate and duplicate and duplicate. So now I've got 4 times the dynamic bones, but we're like 400 and some change, right? So just to prove that to you, I'll drag some of them out. So there's one, and there's one, and there's one. So now I got 4. Let's go ahead and just select all of them here and move it around and see what happens. I'm going to keep dynamic bones highlighted right here. Actually, I want to go to current frame. So this is going to bounce around a little bit, but you'll be able to, we'll look at it in a second. So I'm going to move around and wiggle it a bit and hit pause and take a look. So we are looking at now anywhere between like 0.65 and 1.48. So it spikes a bit depending on basically how dynamic bones behaves. But now we're in the territory where we're hitting, 1.25 in some frames, 1.28 in some frames. That's not great. Again, we've got like 11 to 12 milliseconds and we're eating up 10% of our time on 400 dynamic bones. That sucks, to be frank. And it's a lot easier to say that in like my own video on my own channel rather than like a developer update. But yeah, that blows. So let's take this even farther, and I'm gonna unpause real quick, and let's how am I gonna do this? Let's just attach it to like the hips. I'm gonna get rid of these clones. I'm gonna pull up the armature. I'm gonna add to the hips a dynamic bone collider. And this is going to be a stupid collider. It's completely useless. And we're going to go back to our, like, this isn't going to do anything except just make shit get really weird. We're going to add a collider here, 1 dynamic bone collider. We're going to select our own collider, and oh, I broke my legs. So now let's test it again. I'm on current frame, right? Yeah, sure I am. And we're going to go back here. This is colliders. So now I'm doing this. Let's drag her around a little bit. Oh, I'm not on current, but that's fine. We're going to hit pause, go to current. Now we are seeing dynamic bone at 0.17 just for one model. Remember, we went back down 0.29, that kind of thing. This is not scientific at all. Normally I would have like an Excel spreadsheet open and start like, looking into the actual timings and build out a curve, which I actually did do when I was curious about this. So now we we're seeing worse performance now that, oh, that's good. We're seeing worse performance now that we've added colliders is the primary thing I'm trying to map out here and show you. So again, we've got, that there's multiples in there. And there's also some optimizations that are actually occurring because I'm doing this on a well, this isn't a prefab anymore. Because there may be some optimizations being done kind of in the background, so I don't really know. They're not built into dynamic bone, certainly, but either way, let's drag it around some more. Let's hit current just so I can stuff. Current. And now we are looking again at like 1.2, consistent and spiking up to 2 milliseconds sometimes. So let's pause again, take a look here. So dynamic bones sometimes spikes us up when a lot of colliders are slamming into things. So we've got 5, which I think we had 4 before, so I'm cheating a little bit, but either way, we're now hitting 2 milliseconds, which is, over 20% of our available frame time. Again, 12 milliseconds, 11, 12 milliseconds we have, and we're eating up for 5 people with 100 dynamic bones and 1 collider, uno. We are eating up 2 milliseconds of time. 20% of my CPU time spent each frame is spent on moving your dynamic bones around and touching it with a collider. This collider affects it even if it's not close to the bone. What people don't realize is that colliders always have to check if they're colliding, otherwise it's not a collider. I want you to stop and kind of think about that for a second. Like, how can a collider know it's colliding with a bone or not if it's not always checking for collision? There's ways you can optimize this. There's things like bounding boxes where you can basically have a much more deferred check with a wider collision zone, where it's like if this bone is really far away from the collider, you don't have to check every frame. You can check every 3rd frame or something. Dynamic bones doesn't do that. It checks every frame. Checks every frame on late update to see if the collider is interacting with the bone. So it's a cost with every single frame. So even if you're not touching it, it still costs. If you are touching it, it costs a little bit more because now you have to do more skinning call shenanigans and you have to transform the bone. And apply the actual transformation effect to the bone because of the collider. So it does cost more when you're touching, but even when you're not touching, it still costs an amount. And it's not a cheap amount. So anyways, another thing I'm forgetting to put in here is these frame timings depend on how fast your CPU is. I'm like overclocked on this thing. It's ridiculous. I'm at like 5.1 gigahertz, I think, right now. So this is like ultra best case scenario. You have the best possible hardware at the time of recording to be doing this, and you're still eating 20% of your frame just to move your hair, your skirt, or whatever around. So finally, let's just torture my poor computer. Get out of here. It keeps annoying me. Let's hit duplicate a couple times, and then, maybe one more time. And then let's see how garbage we can make things. Oh yeah, look at that. Beautiful. So this is an absolute garbage case. We've got 50 clones. So this is 50 people in a room, which you probably won't hit nowadays until we get the IK networking patch back in, because you're going to hit problems with IK before you... brains exploding before you run into problems with dynamic bones, but it's certainly not going to help. And you can see pretty clearly, that's 28 milliseconds. We've blown away our limit. We're double our limit, which means that now instead of 90 frames per second, and not even 45 frames per second, we're hanging out at like what? Probably 35-ish? I don't know. No, even less than that. Garbage frame rate is what it would be. And then this is just for dynamic bones. So again, this would be 50 different ones with about 100 and some change avatars. So we are 500 dynamic bone, I'm sorry, not 500, Jesus. 5,000 dynamic bone transforms, a collider on each one. Yeah, this is like ultra worst case, running on like the best hardware you could get this working on. And it's total trash, essentially. This isn't really, excuse me, damn, a reasonable case. This seems more reasonable, I feel like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 dynamic bones with, say, like, a room of 15 people. And each one has a collider affecting that group. Current scene, and then start dragging you around a little bit. This is going to be a little bit more in line with what I'll typically see, and you're seeing it spike up to 3 milliseconds. So, like, even in a reasonable scene, it turns to hot garbage really quick. So anyways, that is all I've got for you, really. I hope you got some information out of this. I apologize if it was long. There's a lot to show, and just kind of to, like, indicate and show off how bad this is. Dynamic bones are great if you use them in small amounts, and you heavily limit the colliders that you put on them, which is the entire reason that the performance rank is so hard on colliders and so hard on dynamic bones. There's basically nothing heavier that you can put onto an avatar except for a light. And that's a different discussion. I know people do crazy fancy things with lights and depth buffers, but 99% of the time people aren't doing that. They're just shoving a flashlight on, you know, Master Chief or whatever. Yeah, so that's basically all I got for you. Dynamic bones, be careful with it. Fun. But if you're going to use a ton of them, please only use them in instances with small amounts of people. Otherwise, you're going to get people making angry faces at you now, because now I guess they can see your stats. That is why dynamic bones is awful. And I'll see you next time, probably whenever I record my import models tutorial again. Soon, TM. Actual soon, TM. Big old TM. Okay, bye.